Hello. I'm going to do a quick sound check like I usually do. All right, that sounds good. That's half the battle. Happy Saturday. So last week we talked quite a bit about some aphids and some pest problems. I'm curious to know in your own gardens if you've had any issues with any pests this year. It doesn't have to be aphids, but maybe if it's aphids, I'd love to hear about any issues you had or how you detected aphid problems in your plants or your garden. Maybe you're having problems with cabbage moths or caterpillars. Maybe you're seeing some large leaf area that's damaged or whatnot. Um, but I'm curious to know if you had any or have had any pest problems. I want to switch gears a little bit this week and talk more about pathogens and plant diseases. So here in Minnesota, we've kind of flip-flopped over the past month. So I talk frequently about the weather, and it is interesting because um, earlier this year I was talking about how we could have a repeat of what we had in the past, where we have the really quick initial warm up, and then it kind of settles off, and then we go into our typical warm up in end of June into July. So this year, Minnesota, we've had uh, 90-degree days already at the end of May into June. It was super hard on our springtime vegetables like sugar snap peas, leafy greens, uh, cabbage, plants that prefer 60 to 70-degree temperatures. And then over the last couple 3 weeks, it's been really nice because we've come back into normal springtime temperatures. We just rolled into summer last week, so happy summer. And after looking at the forecast next week, it's going to be in we're touching the 90s again, and that's expected this time of year coming to the 4th of July. But along with that is when we tend to see some disease pressure. So I'm curious to know if you've had any common diseases that you've seen in your garden in the past, what those were. I've talked briefly about some of the ones that I see here, but I wanted to share with you some of the information that, um, or at least where I get my information, right? So I'll share a book that I'm reading right now. It's pretty dense. So if you like some like high level reading on plant pathology and what causes diseases, I'm going to recommend this book right here, Agrios's Plant Pathology. This is the 6th edition. It was published in 2024, so it's very new. I'm in chapter 3 right now. It's talking about plant genetics and resistance to common diseases and plant pathogens. But there was something I wanted to share with you because it just stood out. I hadn't heard this before, and it's something really interesting. So I have mentioned before about having problems with powdery mildew here. I'm gonna have problems again with it here in August into September. I just expect it. This year, like years past, I'm gonna be taking a proactive approach. So when I get to the middle of next month, I'll actually be showing you what I'm gonna be doing to prepare to prevent the onslaught of powdery mildew. So anyway, in this book right here, uh, it actually specifically talks about the powdery mildew fungi. And the part that I highlighted I wanted to share with you is that it says it was found, for example, that while a pressoria of some powdery mildew, so that's the part that attaches to the leaf. So if you've seen, or if you've never seen powdery mildew in the past, it the name of powdery mildew, that's kind of what it looks like on the leaf surface. So most of the plants that I have issues with are my cucurbits. So think pumpkins, melons, cucumbers, uh, definitely, and then squash. So my large squash plants, they have very large leaf areas. That's typically a fantastic landing spot for a powdery mildew spore to set up shop and then go to town. So anyway, in this book, it talks about, uh, it says that developed a maximum trigger pressure of 2 to 4 millip or Pascal. So um, if you do the the math and figure out what that is, they're basically saying the powdery mildew when it attaches to the leaf surface and it starts to, I'm going to use a mechanical term, like drill into that plant surface area. So the leaf, they're saying that the pressure that fungi has on the leaf surface is about 500 psi at its max. So if you've ever had this problem with powdery mildew and it just seemed like it was very difficult to get rid of, that's what's going on. So there's a couple of terms here we're going to talk about. Historia is one of them. That's basically how that fungi starts to penetrate the leaf surface. Once it penetrates and sets up shop, that's over the point where that fungi is starting to get the upper hand or the winning hand. So, but I want to share that with you because when you talk about like, the pressure of 500 pounds per square inch that fungi is actually um, asserting on that plant leaf, that's significant. So that's not going to be something like where you can rinse that off like I did with the aphids last week. There's going to have to be something else that we would have to talk about on how we can deal with this. So there's different conditions that allow that fungi to spread quicker. And you'll see with a lot of plant pathogens or fungi that they they need if you think about like a triangle, there's some certain conditions. So same thing as we've talked about in the past um, with seedlings. So for plants to grow well, they need a few things. They need sunlight for photosynthesis. They need some water, and then temperature is another common thing that we talk about, especially with growing temperatures right now. We're kind of in spring temperatures, but we're going to be warming up. So same thing like we had here a month ago where the springtime plants were kind of throwing up the white flag of surrender. It's going to be the same thing again for them. But when we talk about like plant pathogens and plant diseases, we still have that sort of a triangle thing where we can think of a triangle and uh, there's some things that those fungi or bacteria or viruses need in order to thrive and to set up shop to do their job. And one of those is they need a plant host that they can actually work with. So with that powdery mildew that I have issues with, I don't typically have problems with my tomatoes, peppers, uh, even like basil or any of my summer herbs. It's typically those plants with a very large surface area that don't have a lot of uh, mechanical protective devices to prevent that fungi from attaching. It, it's interesting because when you talk about certain fungi, there's different ways that they can spread too. So with powdery mildew, that's an airborne fungi that's gonna well, I think I said last week, I've had issues with not only at my nursery location, but also at my customers' locations too. So different types of weather patterns will um, allow something like powdery mildew or other fungi to spread easier. And so we talk about that one leg of the triangle as a, a plant host or a plant that fungi can attack or set up shop in. Temperature or climate conditions is another one. So you'll hear with some fungi where cool humid conditions are a great breeding ground for certain fungi, but if the temperature warms up and it dries out, then it won't be conducive for that type of fungi. fungi. So that's something to know too, is that if you have some type of pressure at a lower temperature when it's more humid, when we get to the heat of the summer, when it typically dries out here in Minnesota, you might not have that same problem. And case in point with this, I had issues with my rhubarb earlier in the spring. So this was like mid-May when the rhubarb plants were starting to wake up. I did have some spotting issues, and that's just common in Minnesota, but it never got out of control. I was also monitoring it pretty close, and if I was going to have to spray some type of copper fungicide, I would have done that if I needed to. But honestly, with that quick heat up, it kind of stopped that fungus in its place. Um, so we have plant hosts, and then we have the climate, so temperature or whatnot. There's some other things to talk about here too. Is fungi or bacteria, they need a incubation period. So this is where the crazy part is, and it can get frustrating as a newer grower or gardener. And hi Jay, I should say hi. I see some chats going on there. Shawnee, nice to see you. Um, but this is where it can get really frustrating as a newer grower. And I know I definitely felt this when I was starting to grow, because you invest all that time, and especially if you start your plants from seed and you master that process of keeping your seedlings alive and getting past the finish line of not having any fungal issues with pythium or damping off. It's what we commonly call it. That's one fungi that you master, and then you go through all that work and labor of transplanting your seedlings out to their final home, whether it be a container or a grow bed or maybe in the ground, a traditional garden. And then we get to July or August, and through no fault of your own, it's just the conditions of temperature, humidity, the stars were maybe in alignment, and you get whacked with a nasty fungi. And this is the part that for me, it always keeps me humble because no matter how confident I feel in my skills as growing, and I'm definitely better than I was 10 years ago. I'm sure if you've gardened for any amount of time, you feel the same way. There's always something. There's always a new fungi. There's always a new virus. There's always a new insect pressure that we may not have had in the past that shows up this year randomly, and it wreaks havoc with certain plants. So this is it's not all doom and gloom. I just wanted to share a little bit with that book that I'm reading right now. Just interesting with powdery mildew about the trigger pressure of 500 psi. It blows my mind about something like that. And I think over the coming weeks I'll share some more from that book because it's a fascinating book. The chapter I'm in right now talks about genetics, and since it was published in 2024, there's quite a bit of information on genetics. So if you want to get like really deep into pathogens and how they behave and how they really work, and just as a side note, I was that kid that was always asking why something happens, why something works like this or whatnot. So if you you're similar to me in that regard, this is going to be a great book for learning more about pathogens. Um, so anyway, that's Agrios's plant pathology. Um, the powdery mildew, like I mentioned, it's also got a bunch of great photos too. I'll show you. Um, which is handy too when you're talking about different types of plant diseases or whatnot. Um, so this is talking down at the cellular level, so you'll see stuff like that, and right there it's just basically talking about a plant cell, and that's how it starts out, and then they start talking about how fungi and different viruses or bacteria attack plants. So on this page right here, I'll show like they have very good photos. Up at the top, you'll see those seedling trays, as I was mentioning. So that photo right there talks about pythium or damping off. So lots of good photos, lots of good information. the genetics gets a little dense. A lot of it's over my head because it's very, very in depth, which that's good if you're a scientist and you're working on that. For me, I don't need to know that much, so I kind of just scroll over that. But as far as when it talks about genetics, it's more specifically talking about why certain plant varieties resist certain fungi, bacteria, viruses versus other ones. So that's kind of cool how this day and age we've gotten as science we've gotten into like genetic mapping, so we can actually see the genetics of certain plants and how they resist fungi or whatnot, or how does this plant is less susceptible to a fungi, bacteria, or virus. Yeah. Uh, for Christ's sake, nice to see you today. We're talking about plant diseases. So what I'm kind of curious is, have you have you had any plant diseases in your garden this year or in the past? And we kind of just jumped into the deep end of plant fungi. So Shawnee says I have some powdery mildew on some peas now. Yeah. Um, so I guess if there's a silver lining on that, most of my peas are finishing up. So here by the first couple of weeks of July, I won't have any peas. In fact, I already have my bush beans that have been going for a few weeks now. So how I grow, since I'm a specialty grower, I have that kind of a tag team match where I start off with peas, beans come in a couple weeks ago, and then as we get into August, gearing up for the fall temperatures again, that's when we roll back into the peas. And I typically do like a shelling pea in the fall time. But Jay, Jay says past common plant diseases, powdery mildew, and then several tomato blights. Yeah, yeah. And for I could speak for my own past learning curve from growing. This comes from experience too, as some plants they go through certain senescence stages. Sometimes they're recycling nutrients. So let's say like a tomato plant is starting to recycle nutrients because it's getting low in nitrogen. I'm just throwing out an example. You start to see the lower leaves turn yellow, and then that that part of the plant will actually it's recycling nutrients. So you'll see that leaf just kind of or shoot just kind of shrivel up and fall off the plant. And when I first started growing, I was concerned about that because I wasn't sure if I had some type of disease or something else going on. Uh, but what I have seen is that if and when I do get some plant disease issues, whether that be like a bacteria or fungi, and there's something else too I can share is most of the problems we're gonna experience in the garden or growing vegetable edible plants, it's gonna be fungi related. There are viruses and bacterias, but that's a fraction of what's floating around there that can cause problems. So uh, mostly gonna be fungi. And for what I've seen, when I start to have problems with fungi, it's relatively quick. So there's very there's not always a lot of time to react to try to intervene with that plant. So if you forget everything else I say today, my best advice is prevention or catching stuff early, just like I caught the aphids last week. And I can report today that I haven't had any more aphid issues this week, but I caught them early before they could do a ton of damage. Same thing with catching plant diseases is the earlier you can catch a problem or the earlier you can anticipate, and this comes from experience too, is if you know certain weather patterns, like if we get a lot of rainy days or high humidity days in a row, you'll you'll come to expect certain plant problems as far as pathogens are concerned. There's also a wild card in there too. So that plant book, plant pathology book talks about vectors, which is kind of a interesting way of putting this. But when we talk about vectors, we're talking about uh, insects that can take hitchhikers with them. So if you got a lot of insect pressure on your plants, some insects can actually transport diseases to your plants, which kind of stinks because, again, if you put all that work into the plants and then have uh, just, I don't know, maybe an aphid or some other type of insect land on your plants, they're doing their thing, but they inadvertently caused a secondary issue with the fungi that's now established in your plants. It that can that can it could be depressing, but at the same time, if we know what to expect or we can prevent for that, then we're just improving our skills, or at least for me, I am. And this is why I talk a lot about row covers. In the past, when I was starting out this year, I talk about row covers a lot because that's one area that we can control for is plants that carry diseases or fungi just by mechanically preventing them from accessing our plants. It sort of rules that issue out. So now we're down to airborne fungi, and then you've also probably heard before is that there's other issues if we have fungi or any type of pathogens in the soil. Probably heard this as common information about not splashing water up on the leaves of your plants. Um, that's another way that we can have issues with fungi entering those plants. So um, yeah, it's a lot, but like I said, catching stuff early, knowing enough to know that certain fungi will cause problems. Also, wherever you're located at, here in Minnesota, in particular, our Minnesota Extension Service through the University of Minnesota, they have a lot of good information for common problems that we have in the state. So if you live in like Texas or California or even Hawaii, your land grant university will have extension service, and that extension service will have a lot of good information on common pests and then common diseases that are known in your geographic location, which is nice because that can help you educate yourself on what to look for, and then how to prevent or minimize any risks that you might have. And I apologize, I didn't silence my phone before I started this. Um, Jay says, overconfident gardener. I think I have totally learned everything I need to for gardening, and then Mother Nature laughs. That's how I feel sometimes. Yep. Some other issues that I've had, one nasty one, besides Pythium or damping off, and I did have some issues with that this year. And so what I use for nursery equipment is I used the air pruning, they're called wind strip trays. Never Sink Farm sells those. That's who I get mine from. I think Bootstrap Farmer sells something equivalent to that. And how I clean those or sterilize them is I actually use a brew kettle. So it's a 10-gallon, basically a pot, and then I had an electric one, and that worked fine. It had a thermostat on it, so I could just set it to 160 degrees, but it took longer than I wanted to wait for the water to heat up. So now I'm using a propane turkey fryer, which is the same dimensions. It's 10-gallon, and then I use propane heat for that. I warm it up, and then I dip my wind strip trays, so my nursery trays in that, and then any other equipment I'm using in the nursery, I dip in that. So that's something else I want to talk to about was is sanitation. So you've probably heard about this if you've been growing for any amount of time. And Jay says that was Mother Nature calling your phone. Yeah, it might be. Uh, so you probably heard about sanitation, but just some things to think about as far as what could cause problems or introduce fungi and nasty stuff into your garden or plants. So any tools that you use. So for me, I use pruners, hand pruners. I disinfect those. Like I mentioned, I disinfect my nursery wind strip trays. I actually have bottom trays that I use for bottom watering with those wind strip trays. I dunk those in the hot water too. And I mentioned 160 degrees Fahrenheit is what I use. So uh, that's a good temperature to run if you're gonna do a hot water method of sanitation too. So at over 160 degrees, it's gonna kill most of the common fungi and bacteria that could possibly cause problems with your plants. Something else for sanitation is leaf debris. Probably heard about this, but if you have any issues with any type of uh, fungi, and this is an interesting topic too that I was kind of curious about, is like we talked about what fungi need to thrive, and one of those is they need a plant host. Well, what if there isn't a plant host around, and maybe that fungi, well, let's say your snap peas, right? So your snap peas have powdery mildew, so you now have that fungi that's in your area, your garden. Let's say one of those pea plants is now on the ground. We get to the end of the season, and you haven't maybe you didn't see that plant or it's still there on the in the garden area. It, I was kind of curious to know about how does this fungi, if it doesn't have a live host, how does it stick around? It's interesting because these fungi have been around a lot longer than us, so they're not dumb, and they can slow down their their metabolism, so they don't need to be like consuming like carbohydrates or sugars like maybe aphids do. They can live in the soil. We hear about fungi living in the soil. They can live in the fungi for many years. This is fungi specific, but that's something else to consider too. Is if you have problems with certain fungi, you want to make sure that the area around your garden is clean and clear because that's another potential spot. So any other garden tools like hose or rakes or stuff like that, you can sanitize those. Um, and the craziest part about this whole journey too is that fungi are small. We can't see them until they've um, gone through the reproduction cycle. So that's what I mean. When we start to notice the plant suffering, that's how we can visibly see an issue. But that's probably one of the hardest parts for me too, is that, and I don't want to say I'm paranoid. I'm probably like just under the borderline of paranoid all the time, but I don't want to unknowingly introduce something into the plant nursery when I could have spent another minute making sure that a tool was sanitized or double checking a nursery tray to make sure that actually was sanitized before I introduced a problem. So this is also too, if you've heard about this, using non-soil potting material. So I buy commercial potting soil for my seed starts. I don't make that. I dinked around with that years ago, but the economics don't make sense for me because I can buy in bulk for a lower price than it takes me to like mix stuff up. So that's another reason why with like Pythium or damping off, um, it's critical to make sure like the potting soil is sterile. But this is all to say uh, your potting soil, your tools that you use, and then leaf clutter or debris. Those are areas that if you haven't thought about in the past, that's a good those are good areas to think about when you're planning your gardening or working and trying to reduce the fungi pressure in your growing spot. Okay, this is a pretty good question. Um, how do we balance keeping the soil clean sanitation and utilizing mulch, less weeding, watering, and healthier soil? Yeah. So let's talk about this because this is something I'm fascinated with too. So if you go through any type of college level um, chemistry, um, you learn about how uh, with if we're talking about like the atomic, let's say like a hydrogen or like maybe helium, you you can't create or destroy. I think this is one of the laws of thermodynamics, or I don't know. I'm drawing a blank. I should have prepared more for this statement, but basically, this is horrible explanation. You can't create or destroy what's already here. It's sort of similar, or how I relate it in my brain with fungi. Fungi is not just going to magically, spontaneously appear in your soil. It came from somewhere. So knowing that it came from somewhere, if you have plants in your area that you know have a fungi that could potentially attack your like your cucumber plants, then you want to definitely make sure that those are not in your area anymore. If you want to mulch your garden, I believe in mulch also, but probably a bad plant to put in as mulch would be something that is known to have a fungi that could potentially have an issue with one of your other plants. So, what are some uh, good alternatives or good choices for plant mulch? That's up to you. There's a bunch of different options, and it depends on how you're growing. For some of my container plants, I started using a weed-free straw this year for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to have a cleaner presentation for my plants when I'm bringing them to my programs. And then two, I was kind of experimenting with can I retain more moisture in the grow bag, um, but between watering. So far I haven't seen a big increase in moisture retention only because we kind of went down to cooler days again. Um, But with that straw that I'm using, this is commercially prepared straw that's been sanitized too. So it's basically it's weed free, it's fungi free. Um, but this goes back to be careful of what you're using for mulch, because if you have a fungi that's already known to be in your area, you want to be a bit careful that you're not adding more of that to your garden space. There's some other things that you could experiment with if you do have, or be like one extra level of caution. That's solarization. So I've tried this with grow bags. I was curious, and I'm gonna probably be doing this with some of my older potting soil for the economic version or uh, the economic point of with my potting soil, if I can reuse it or basically cut it with virgin potting soil, then I can elongate the time that I can use in the nursery. So what I'm talking about like solarization is I'm talking about like spreading out maybe mulch if you're talking about mulch or potting soil and basically letting the sun warm it up to that 160-degree point to kill any pathogens or weed seeds to a lesser extent. But the core concept here is that fungi are not going to magically appear. They come from somewhere, and if we can interrupt the cycle by changing the growing conditions or prevented them access to our plants, that's really what we're going on here. There's also chemical treatments that you could use, and I'm not going to really talk about those right now because I don't. I use organic practices, so I'm not big into chemical applications unless I absolutely need to use them. So, um, but that's the best way I can describe that answer is keep on using the mulch, but if you have a plant that obviously looks like it has an issue, you don't want to add that. And in fact, what could you do with some plant debris that has a known fungi, for instance, like some type of blight or powdery mildew or maybe downy mildew? Burn it. So I have a burn barrel in anything that I have issues with, any type of spot diseases here or windborne fungi that goes into the burn barrel. So grab my NA beer, light a fire, and then make some good potash. Bowtie David has a plant solarizer. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yep. Put debris in a box and a plant glass top. That's fantastic. Yeah. All right. I've talked enough. We gotta look at some plants now. I also can't sit still, so I don't know if I've ever shared that, but we gotta keep this moving. So I'm gonna switch over to the plant show, and I didn't bring any plants in here today, but I have a bunch of photos, and I learned how to do the slideshow on OBS, so I'm gonna try that out today, and then I'm gonna talk through the slides, kind of like we did last week, but last week, what I was using, this is just behind the scenes on OBS. I was doing a screen share. I'm not going to do that anymore because obviously OBS was having issues, and I think I just had too many things going on. So what I did figure out how to do and was practicing with is there's actual slideshow feature here on OBS, so kind of happy with that. And I'm going to turn that on now, and then turn me off, and then we're just going to go through some slides, look at some plants. So this first one is from it's a senior living community here in our town, Northfield. We technically live in Denison, um, but this is the next town over. So I work with one of the senior living communities there, and I started with them here in May. And in May we did the potting activity, and then after the potting activity, the month of June was the spring garden tour, and I talked a little bit about that in the past live streams. But basically, what that was I brought a container garden that was typical for a Minnesota spring here locally in our region. So what that consists of is mostly what you see here. So there's violas on the right, and then nasturtiums on the left. These were actually plants that I brought to this community in May. We did a potting activity, and most of the potting activities were indoors because the weather was not the best. So, and that was fine. So we did those in quarter gallon grow bags, which I've shared on live streams before. And then as the temperatures or the weather improved, the residents were able to take those seedlings that were in the quarter gallon grow bags, and then they transplanted them into their raised planter beds like you see here. So I was really excited because the director here told me that a lot of the plants were thriving. So that was fantastic news to my ears. And then when I showed up this month, we inspected their plants, and then we rolled right into the spring tour. So I'm gonna show you some of those plant or those pictures too. So this was one of their planter beds with nasturtiums and violas. And then this one right here, I can't remember if I showed this seedling here a few months ago, but the one on the right is called red deer tongue, and that's one of my favorite ornamental lettuce plants. And it's just a very cool plant. It's mostly I love it because the vibrant color. I love bright colors. So any type of plant varieties that I can find that have bright colors or those really dark reds or purples, I go after those because they're fun to show and tell also. So like kindergarten or elementary school, show and tell. So red deer tongue on the right, it's a leaf lettuce, and then the smaller seedling to the left, or the smaller plant is called that's rosemary. So that resident wanted an herb, and then on the bottom here, I'll show that up close. This is an all-star strawberry. So this was one of the plants that I brought to the June session. So this was this week at this same place, and then I left one of the all-star strawberries there. So they can either continue to water it in the grow bag or they can transplant that into one of those raised planter beds too. They have a couple other planter boxes, so I told them, the director, that it's up to them. They can keep on watering the strawberry plant in the bag or feel free to transplant it. That's All Star. It's a June bearing strawberry. I've been really happy with the performance. It throws out a ton of runners. So what I've been doing this last week is I've actually been taking all the runners, the daughter plants, and I've been cutting those and sticking those in soil. So here in another week or two, I'll show you that. I'm basically propagating that plant, the All Star. So that's that one. And then this one right here was at another, this is that different senior living community. I always start the programs the same. So it always starts, this version of the slideshow works well. Thank you for that feedback, I appreciate that. I always start the programs out with mint plants, and I believe I have 5 different varieties of mint plants at this point, and I'm propagating them all. So far, out of all the programs that I ran, chocolate mint seems to be the top one. I think it's just from the novelty, and then the aroma off the chocolate mint is fantastic too. So if you've never smelled or interacted with a chocolate mint plant, I recommend it. It's a fantastic plant. But we always start with the mint plants. It's a great way to wake up your sense of smell, and they're just fun plants to share. They All the mint plants have a strong enough aroma to where even if your sense of smell is not the best, you can typically get a pretty good whiff and have that sensory experience. So that was that. And then this is at another senior living community this week. One of the residents asked me to check out some house plants, and that was fun. So I asked if I could take a photo of this because it would be a fun show and tell one too. But I love the cute little containers here. So that's a that's a cool little pot that I hadn't seen before, and I think it's mostly the smiley face that I enjoyed seeing. Okay, last week I had mentioned these sticky cards that I was going to put up to monitor pests in the hoop house, and this is the yellow one. So that's what they look like. There's like a 3x5 card, so they're not big, but they work really well for just doing some preliminary scouting, monitoring the conditions around the plants. And then here's the blue one. So Jay, I'm gonna come back to your comment because that's I'm gonna come back to that after we get done with this plant show because that's a very important point. But here's the blue cards I mentioned about, and nothing too concerning on here. There's some fungus gnats, uh, but I'm monitoring for thrips, so that's really what I'm looking for. And I don't expect any thrip pressure until we get to later July or August, and that's only if it's going to be a super dry, hot summer. That's when I've had problems with them in the past. Is consistent high and consistent dry days. So. All right, so this is in the plant nursery here. I mentioned I have raspberries, or I call it raspberry row, but I also added some blackberries this year. So I buy my stock from the larger wholesale nurseries, and then I grow them out to finish them to either sell or for the programs that I run. So this one I'm super excited about because this is the first blackberry plant that I've purchased and grown out. And this right here made me smile because I saw this 2 days ago and I wanted to snap a picture and share it with you. But that's the first blackberry flower that I've seen on any of the plants. So this is gonna be exciting because my bumblebees are gonna catch it, they're gonna do their thing, and then I'm gonna share the progress on this plant. So I have 10 of these plants. The Chester blackberry, they the wholesale nursery says they go down to zone 5, and we're in 4B here in this part of Minnesota. But we should be fine because like my strawberry plants and the other perennials, I overwinter them in my uh, insulated shop. So it's an unheated shop, but it's insulated, so it never goes below 0 in the winter, and it's typically about 15 to 20 degrees warmer than ambient temperature. So I think we're going to be just fine on this plant, but Chester blackberry is the name of this guy. So let's turn me back on, turn this back off. All right, I'll ask this or answer this question first. Why do the sticky traps have grids? How many insects per square inch? That's probably what's going on. I'm not using it for that purpose. Uh, what's interesting, I probably could have taken a picture of this. I'm sure you've heard me say this in the past, but we have mono crops outside that window. So there's an 80-acre, I think it's beans this year, right over my shoulder. They use those type of sticky traps on stakes, so that's how they monitor or they calculate. So yeah, that's probably what they're doing. All I'm using it for in the hoop house is to know, did the thrips get to this point? Because some of the insects, they have to get past the screening, so that hoop house isn't open to the Mother Nature. Anything that's rolled up, so the plastic on the sides or on the ends that's open, the insects can't just immediately fly into the inside of that hoop house. I got insect screening everywhere. So that keeps all the bigger problems like the leaf hoppers, the grasshoppers, the flying insects, they can't get inside the hoop house, or it's harder for them to get in. But thrips are so small. That's why I have the cards out there, so they're going to be the first warning for me, is if I got thrip pressure, or at least that's the reasoning behind it. So when I've had thrips in the past, I didn't have those cards. That's an addition that I made here in the last couple of years. And these 3x5 cards are the first time I've used this style of card in the hoop house. So first year with it, I've used the tape and the bigger rolls where you can unroll it and then tear it off and then throw that up on a hook or whatnot. But those 3x5 cards they're smaller. I get 70 something in the box, and so far they're doing the job. But yeah. Okay, I wanted to go back to this comment that you had on there. The catching the natural sense of plants and trees offers profound health and psychological benefits. These natural aromas quickly interact with the brain's emotional center. So, I have seen this firsthand over and over and over, and this is actually one of the things that I incorporate in all my marketing material. Because at the end of the day, I have to be able to sell what I do, and I have to present it in a way that activities director or a wellness director or a life enrichment director, they all have their different names, but it's the same position. I have to uh, communicate that in a way to where they understand the benefits of this program for their residents. So from my standpoint, from having done these programs for over we're 3 months now, because I started doing demo sessions in April, and then the full program came out in May, and we're just finishing up June. I've seen this over and over and over, especially with the Roma. So uh, lots of residents who are maybe not, um, and I should clarify too. So I work with a broad group of residents. So when I talk about like senior living communities, it's not just like assisted living. I've done programs for memory care, dementia care. That's a big bulk of it, but I also do programs for assisted living. I've done ones for multi-generational. So I mentioned that last week where we had the seniors, but we also had preschoolers, and that was a whole fun dynamic too with that. And then I've also done programs for nursing homes, or they call it skilled nursing. So those are folks that um, they they might be recovering from a injury where they need uh, nursing help, or some type of other issue going on where they need either temporary or more of a long-term nursing home. So I've developed and ran programs in all these types of um, living in, setups, and it's challenging for me because I can't take a program that I developed for dementia care and run it in an independent living. It doesn't It probably could work, but it would be missing the mark. So without doing a ton of customization, I basically have different programs for different types of communities. That's the best way I could describe it. And so if I work with the like assisted living here and then go to work with assisted living over here, that's going to be the same program. But if I go work at a dementia care over at this community, that's going to be a completely different program versus the assisted living program. So, and they typically involve the same plants. It's just the structure, the flow of how the program runs. It's different. This is all to say that I've had residents that I've interacted with that I've seen where they made, let's say, like a skilled nursing setting where they may not um, they may have like a lot of physical limitations, but as soon as they smell like a chocolate mint again or a mojito mint, and then hear me cracking a joke about bringing the rum to make mojitos, their whole like body reaction changes. I see them light up. I see sometimes their eyes will open, sometimes they'll smile, and I see the power of that plant, and it's not me, it's the natural interaction with nature, and it's very there's a lot of meaning to it. I see the power of the program, the power of nature, and my goal is to facilitate in a way to where these residents get the maximum value of these horticulture plants. So it's just a very, very cool experience, and um, I've, I've, I I took a long-winded way of explaining this, but uh, that's why I wanted to address your comment. Is that I've seen this firsthand, like every week for multiple months now. It's it's a very there's a lot of meaning to behind it. So lots of value for these residents that live in these communities. So some of these other comments I see here, stress reduction. Natural odors interact with the brain's limbic system to regulate emotions and significantly reduce symptoms of stress, exhaustion, and anxiety. This is something else I want to mention because I think I've briefly mentioned it, but I haven't gone into depth. So one of the communities I worked with early on, so they're one of the first ones that I approached, and they brought me in as a vendor. Um, that was Ling Bloomston. And uh, I I was very thankful because they put me through a like a training program. And one of the things I learned was it's called and I want to share with you is it's called the bookshelf theory. And so my great grandmother suffered from Alzheimer in her later days. The last 2 years of her life, she didn't know who I was. So I was younger. I was I think 12, 13 at the time. It's just a kind of an odd interaction because that's the first time I've seen where humans, well, you grow up knowing another human, and then when you see somebody that suffers from dementia or Alzheimer's, and you you kind of start asking questions like, the first one is this human's not really what I remember. Um, something's changed. You don't when you're 13, you don't quite know what that is, but something's obviously different because great grandma doesn't know who I am anymore. A good day, she didn't know who my dad was or her grandson. A bad day was we'd have a very awkward family meeting because there's six of us and great grandma doesn't know who we are. So that was one of my first encounters with somebody that was suffering from Alzheimer or dementia. Maybe you have somebody in your family that has suffered from the same thing, that you've had the same question of something's not right, that this human's changed. You can obviously see in how they respond to you or interact with you. But anyway, when I was going through this vendor training, I learned about what's called the bookshelf theory. And I want to share that with you because if you've never heard of this, it might make more sense of these encounters or experiences that you've had with maybe family, loved ones, friends that are suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. So the bookshelf theory goes like this. If you imagine a bookshelf on the bottom row, the first row of that bookshelf, those are your core memories from childhood. So think like infant, preschool, elementary school, maybe up to 10. That's the first row of the bookshelf. The second row of the bookshelf is going to be maybe your adolescent, teenage years. And then as you grow older, become more wiser, you start stacking books on the bookshelf. And at some point in time, that bookshelf starts rocking. And as it starts rocking, the books at the very top of the bookshelf start to fall off. When I learned this, I instantly clicked in my mind because I've always heard that uh, those that suffer from Alzheimer or dementia, and just to like clarify these terms, how I was taught was dementia is the umbrella term. Um, Alzheimer or other types of uh, diseases are like more specific underneath the big dementia umbrella. So with this bookshelf analogy again, as the bookshelf starts rocking, books start falling off the bookshelf. Those are your recent memories or your short-term memory. And that's when it clicked for me because I'd always heard that people that have Alzheimer's or dementia-related diseases, the short-term memory is the first to go. So after I learned this theory, the analogy, I'm like that makes sense. I could see this. So how this relates to me as a vendor that has been putting on these programs is that for the last few months, as I've been interacting with these communities, I see this firsthand to where some of these residents, they'll ask me the same question 10 times in a 30-minute or 60-minute program, and I'll just answer it like I did the first time. Because to them, with what they're going through, they they're in their reality, and so some of the questions I'll get like are where's my plant nursery or where am I from? So I'll say where I'm from, and then I might have to say it another half dozen times, or my name, something like that. But what doesn't change is the core memories. So that's something else too that I've learned is that when you think about core memories or core feelings or core emotions, I guess is a better way to put this. So this is like fear, joy, love, that type of thing. Um, that's more, as I understand, that's more in the amygdala. And I'm not an expert. This is just crash course 101 on how this works. But I'm going to tie this back to the plants. So even though some of that I'm working with these like peppermint or chocolate mint plants again, they might ask me 10 times in a half an hour what my name is or where I'm from. What usually doesn't change is that once they smell a chocolate mint plant, it triggers a core memory to where all of a sudden somebody that asked me 5 times what my name was in the span of 10 minutes, they're now telling me about their childhood garden that their mother or father loved, or that they got to help can tomatoes in, or pull rhubarb and make rhubarb crisp. That's the most powerful thing that I've seen in these programs is um, just how these plants are able to trigger these core memories, and that's the biggest meaning. That's the most powerful aspect of these programs is seeing that. So Dave asked how's the Squatch. Yeah, I got my Squatch hat on today. Well, we got a lot of stuff I got to catch up on here in the chat here. Um, so ecology today, better sleep, soothing fragrances of plants like lavender and jasmine lower heart rate and reduce insomnia, ensuring a more restful sleep. Lavender is actually one of the plants that I had for the June program, to where residents could smell, and we were even harvesting lavender plants. So the lavender plants I have right now, they're actually flowering, so they get to see what the actual plant looks like, but then what the flowers look like too on those plants. Pain relief. Studies show the positive distraction of nature's scents can even increase pain tolerance or reduce physical discomfort. Yeah, I could see that. And then Dave from Bowtie Life, nice to see you. Jay says, I'm glad you have found such a satisfying side project for your plant business. I am too. It's a rewarding it's a rewarding job, I guess, if I want to call it a job. It doesn't really feel like work. It feels like I get to play with plants. I even had a participant, a resident, a few weeks ago that thanked me. This is in memory care, dementia care. Thanked me for bringing the plants and helping her reconnect these memories, because she was one of the ones that was talking a lot about her childhood gardens. And once somebody starts to talk about core memories like that or childhood gardens, I'll ask follow-up questions, because then that gets them talking about um, what their experience was like. It's usually like a mother or father who was the primary gardener, or maybe a mother who used to can salsa or something like that. But she thanked me for bringing the plants and run the program because it helped her like reconnect those memories. So that was a valuable compliment. And she also said that uh, I can't remember exactly how she said it, but it's basically that um, you have you have a job, or what I'm doing with these programs. But she said it's a fun job. I said it is a fun job. Bowtie Life says, I know the bookshelf theory. I've heard that my mom has extreme forgetfulness in her last 9 months or so, but never diagnosed dementia. Yeah, yeah. After I found out about that, I mentioned this, but after I found out about that, like everything clicked, because just hearing that for years, about the short-term memory that goes first, that it all started to make sense. My aunt, who had dementia, lived with us for another 12 to 18 months when I was a teen. Yeah, you probably saw the same thing. Sounds like you might have had the same experiences that I had too. Let's see, lavender is really good. Yep. Uh, Something else that I love about lavender is I'd mentioned about the different mint plants. It's a strong enough scent. That's something else that I encounter a lot is something you may not even think about, but you've probably heard is that during COVID, those who actually caught COVID or went through that, some of them have a reduced sense of smell now. That's something that I see too. Not all the time, but I've seen it multiple times now in the last few months where some of these residents, they'll tell me too, is that COVID wiped out their sense of smell. But even still, the more fragrant or the ones that have a stronger aroma. Lavender is one of those. I have a lemon thyme plant that I love. I use that as a closing plant because that lemon thyme, I'll I'll actually like tickle the leaves and then I'll tell everybody I'm warming up the desserts, and then we'll bring the plant around. That's one of those plants that has such a strong aroma that even if you have a difficult time smelling a lot of common smells, aromas, that one most people can still smell because it's just so strong and vibrant. So, yep, lavender's good. Jasmine, magnolia, citronella. Yep. So many herbs too. Yeah. So how I have this set up, I have it set up this seasonal program, so it changes every month. It's closing time. Yeah. You know what? I didn't even think about that. The closing time line. I think I might have to add that as I'm bringing out the lemon thyme. It's closing time. I like that. Um, but since I have this set up to be seasonal, every month is different, different theme, different activity. We're getting into the summer herbs, the annuals. So I have, I think, 5 different types of basil. So this week we roll into July. This week is going to be the first for the basil. So I have Thai basil. I have Italian large leaf basil. So that's going to be that sweet basil that most people think of when they think about recipes with basil. So like bruschetta or maybe some pizza with basil, whatever. So then I have lemon basil, which is my favorite basil of all time. I might change that if I smell a different one, but right now, out of all the basil varieties I grow, lemon is my absolute favorite. So it's just, it's a fantastic plant. The scent and aroma. And then I can't do lemon basil without doing lime basil. So lemon, lime, Italian large leaf, Thai basil, then the last one is cinnamon basil, which has a different fragrance to that one also. So those are the 5 basils. They're going to show up this week in the programming. I'll probably bring a couple of mint plants too, but this is where we kind of transition to the summer herbs. So those are going to be fun ones. Jay, if I use that pun, I owe you 25 cents. All right. It's worth the payment for the royalties because that's a good one to. I'm surprised that you know what. Sometimes I beat myself up for not thinking about these little nuance because I'm detail oriented. But the reality that I live in is that what I'm doing right now is like so new that I'm dealing with the larger issues first, and then as I continue to refine and develop the programs, I get smaller details that I think about. So I beat myself up, but I don't beat myself up too bad because I have to think about the bigger issue of how is how is the flow of this program actually going to roll out, and I need to worry about that before I worry about the little nuanced puns or whatnot. So, but I appreciate that. Andy, I have an extension. We should talk about offline because I did find an extension that I'm probably going to start using next week there, Dave. I haven't, I'm trying to add one more thing. So, Dave, I don't know if you noticed or it came in after I did the slideshow, but I'm not doing the screen share anymore. I actually set it up as the slideshow that it looks like it worked really well this week. So, I'm going to continue to go with that. But I wanted to leave with you with what's going on this week. So we transitioned to July. I've talked about a lot of the programming that I've done the last couple of months. And this next month in July is the month of the tomato. So I know Shawnee grows, and I think Robin Gardens talked about some tomatoes. I got to tune in a little bit this last Thursday night. Uh, July is all about tomato programs at these senior living communities, which is super exciting because I love tomatoes. That's kind of the iconic gardening plant. And that's how I started too. I started growing food because I wanted salsa or fresh homegrown salsa. So talk about peppers, tomatoes, onions, and then cilantro. That's how it started, and then it kind of it kind of went out of control after that. And July will be the month of tomato. So some of the things, and I'll have photos of this that I may have the senior living communities help me with is we're going to be pruning and trellising. I have different ways I trellis my tomato plants in containers or grow bags, and depends on the plant variety. So I have four different plant varieties. I think I shared those earlier this year. Bing is one that's a super sweet cherry tomato indeterminate plant. Sun Gold is another indeterminate gold plant that's super high sugar content. Little Bites is a dwarf compact one. And then my fourth one is Gold Nugget, which is it's not quite as compact as the Little Bites. It's kind of a goofy, gnarly one because it just kind of explodes with foliage. So anyway, I'm going to have these senior living communities. We're going to be comparing the different plant varieties because they all four look different. They're going to have different colors of fruits, and then they grow. The Bing and the Sun Gold grow similar, but we need to prune them because if we keep on letting them go, they're just going to blow up. So we're gonna be hooking up our bamboo trellises. I use 3 4 foot bamboo poles for trellising those tomatoes, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. So that's what's coming up. Jay says, as a gardener, we are often functionally exhausted, so it's really hard to consider all the potential aspects. I hear that. Yep. Oh, that's fascinating, Dave. Uh, you wrote a book on how to run a local delivery service. Can you share the link to that? I'd love to see that. I'm gonna have to get your autograph on it. Live chat overlay. Okay. Yep. Cool. All right. Well, that's what I have to share with you guys this week. I appreciate you hanging out and talking about plant programs and plant pathogens. I hope you're. I want to send love and positive vibes to your gardens this year, and hope you don't have any fungi or any diseases. But if you do, don't forget, like I said earlier in the program, the best way of prevention is catching it super early before it can grab a hold of your plant. So if you forget everything else, catch the problems early, and your future self will thank you. So have a great week. I'll see you